The stars had never looked so cold to Commander Jake Morrison as they did that morning on the bridge of the EDS Valiant. For 3 years, he had served humanity's interests among the Galactic Council, believing every word they spoke about unity, cooperation, and peace across the 17 star systems. His crew trusted him, Earth trusted the Council, and he had staked his entire career on the promise that humanity finally had allies among the stars. Lieutenant Megan Phillips broke the silence that had settled over the bridge like a funeral shroud. Her fingers moved across the communications console with practiced efficiency, but Jake could see the tension in her shoulders. Something was wrong. He had learned to read his crew over years of service, and right now every instinct told him that whatever Megan had discovered would change everything. "Commander, you need to see this," Megan said quietly. Her voice carried that particular tone that officers used when they were about to deliver catastrophic news. She transferred the data to his personal screen, and Jake felt his blood run cold as he read through the intercepted transmission. The message was encoded in Draxian military cipher, which was strange enough since Earth and the Draxian Consortium were supposed to be partners in the Council. But the content made Jake's hands shake with barely controlled rage. Detailed coordinates of every human colony world, complete schematics of Earth's defensive installations, fleet positions, supply routes, civilian population centers. Everything humanity had shared with the Council in the spirit of cooperation had been cataloged, analyzed, and distributed to the Draxian Military Command. "How long have they been compiling this?" Jake asked, though he already knew the answer would hurt. 3 years, sir," Megan replied. "Since the day Earth joined the Council. Every diplomatic exchange, every joint military exercise, every technology sharing agreement. We weren't partners. We were being studied like specimens in a laboratory." Jake stood from his command chair and walked to the viewport. The Valiant was currently stationed in the Outer Rim sector, light years from Earth, participating in what the Council had called a joint security operation. Now he understood that Earth's fleet had been deliberately scattered across friendly sectors, positioned far from home where they couldn't respond quickly to a coordinated attack. "Get me Admiral Hayes on priority channel," Jake ordered. "Encrypt everything through our own systems. Don't use any Council communication networks." It took 17 minutes for the connection to establish, using humanity's independent faster-than-light communication relays. When Admiral Richard Hayes appeared on the screen, Jake could see that the older man already knew. The Admiral's weathered face showed the strain of command, but his eyes burned with cold fury. "Morrison, how quickly can you get the Valiant back to Earth space?" Hayes asked without preamble. 16 hours if we push the engines hard, sir. What's happened?" Hayes closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them again, Jake saw something he had never seen in his commanding officer before. Fear. Not for himself, but for humanity itself. "New Horizon is gone," Hayes said quietly. "The Draxian fleet hit them 4 hours ago. 2 million colonists. They didn't even have time to evacuate." Jake felt the deck shift beneath his feet, though he knew it was just his sense of reality tilting off its axis. New Horizon had been humanity's agricultural hub, a peaceful world where families had built homes and farms under alien suns. His daughter Amy had wanted to transfer there after completing her education. She had loved the idea of growing real food under open skies. "Amy," Jake whispered. "She transferred there 6 months ago. She was studying advanced agriculture at the Northern Settlement." Hayes looked away from the screen. That was answer enough. The bridge went silent. Every officer present had family, friends, or loved ones scattered across the human colonies. New Horizon wasn't just a strategic loss. It was personal. "The Council claims we violated peace accords," Hayes continued, his voice tight with controlled anger. "They're broadcasting propaganda across every channel, saying humanity was building illegal weapons in the colonies. It's a coordinated operation, Morrison. They hit 15 worlds simultaneously. The Draxian forces are overwhelming our defensive positions, and they're using our own tactical data against us." Jake forced himself to focus through the grief that threatened to overwhelm him. He was a naval officer. He had a duty. There would be time to mourn later if any of them survived what was coming. What are our orders, sir? Get every human ship you can find and rendezvous at coordinates I'm transmitting now. The Council thinks they've beaten us already. They're about to learn they made a terrible mistake. The transmission ended, and Jake turned to face his crew. Every face on the bridge showed the same mix of shock, grief, and building rage. These were good people who had believed in the Council's mission. They had trusted alien allies who turned out to be planning humanity's extinction. "Helm, set course for the rendezvous coordinates," Jake ordered. "Maximum speed. Communications, send coded messages to every human vessel in this sector. Operation Homecoming is active. Everyone comes home. Now." Across the galaxy, similar scenes played out on every human ship. Captain Danny Cooper had been leading a routine patrol along the Threshold Gateway when his communications officer intercepted the Council's attack orders. He abandoned his post immediately, ignoring the confused transmissions from his Valorian counterparts asking why he was breaking formation. Danny had never trusted the Valorians completely. They were too rigid, too convinced of their own superiority. The Valorian Empire commanded the largest military force in the Council, and they had always treated human officers with barely concealed condescension. Now Danny understood why. They had never seen humans as equals. They had seen them as targets. His ship, the EDS Defender, wasn't a warship in the traditional sense. It was a fast attack vessel designed for patrol and reconnaissance. But Danny had cross-trained his crew on every weapons system Earth had developed, including a few modifications that weren't exactly regulation. If the Council wanted a fight, the Defender would give them one. "Sir, we're receiving transmissions from the colony at Epsilon Station," his communications officer reported. "They're under attack. Draxian cruisers are bombarding the surface installations." Danny pulled up the tactical display. Epsilon Station was only 3 light hours away. His ship could be there in 20 minutes if he pushed the engines into the red zone, but the orders were clear. All ships rendezvous for Operation Homecoming. Going to Epsilon Station alone would be suicide, and it wouldn't save the colonists. It was the hardest decision Danny had ever made, but he was a soldier. Sometimes soldiers had to make impossible choices. "Stay on course for rendezvous," he ordered, his voice rough. "Log every transmission from Epsilon Station. Document everything. The galaxy is going to know what the Council did here." On Earth itself, President Helen Warren sat in the Emergency Command Center deep beneath the Capitol, watching as reports flooded in from across human space. 15 colonies under siege. Thousands of ships attacking simultaneously. Millions of human lives hanging in the balance. The careful diplomatic edifice she had built over 3 years was collapsing, revealing the ugly truth beneath. Vice Admiral Greg Patterson stood beside her, reviewing tactical assessments on a holographic display that showed the devastating scope of the Council's betrayal. Every indicator suggested the same conclusion. Without immediate reinforcement, the colonies would fall within a week. Earth's scattered fleet couldn't respond fast enough to stop the onslaught. "They planned this perfectly," Patterson said bitterly. "They positioned our forces exactly where they needed us. Far from home, scattered across Council space, integrated into their command structures. We can't coordinate a defense because we gave them all our communication protocols." "How long do we have?" Helen asked. "Conventional response. The colonies fall in 6 days. The Council fleet reaches Earth orbit in 3 weeks. Our defensive installations might hold for another week after that. Total collapse within a month, ma'am." Helen had been in politics for 30 years, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. The weight of humanity's survival rested on decisions she would make in the next few hours. She thought about the children on New Horizon, the families on Epsilon Station, the billions of people on Earth who still believed their government could protect them. "What about unconventional response?" she asked quietly. Patterson met her eyes. They had discussed this scenario in classified briefings, hypothetical contingency plans that no one ever expected to activate. Black projects hidden from the Council, developed in secret shipyards where alien sensors couldn't reach. "That would require authorization of Project Retribution, ma'am. Once we activate that, there's no going back. The Council will know we've been building weapons in secret. It validates their propaganda claims that we were violating peace accords. We're always going to attack, Helen said. The propaganda is just justification for what they already decided to do. They don't want partners. They want our planets, our resources, and our extinction. How long before Project Retribution is operational? Dr. Mitchell reports the Ghost Fleet can launch in 18 hours. But ma'am, we've never tested these systems in actual combat. This is experimental technology based on theoretical applications of captured alien equipment. If it fails, we die a little faster than we would have anyway, Helen interrupted. At least this way we go down fighting, authorize Project Retribution, get our people home, and show the Council what humanity does to those who betray us. In a classified facility beyond the Kuiper Belt, Dr. Corinne Mitchell received the authorization codes with a mix of relief and terror. She had spent 3 years developing weapons systems that the Galactic Council didn't know existed. Hidden shipyards constructed vessels using designs that combined human innovation with reverse-engineered alien technology. The Ghost Fleet, as her team called it, represented humanity's insurance policy against exactly the scenario now unfolding. Corinne stood in the observation bay looking at the ships her team had built. They didn't look like traditional Earth vessels. The designs incorporated gravitational field manipulation, quantum displacement drives, and weapon systems that could theoretically punch through shields designed to stop conventional attacks. Theoretically, because until now it had all been theory and simulation. Begin activation sequence, Corinne ordered. All ships to standby status. We launch in 16 hours. Her chief engineer, a brilliant woman named Lisa Grant, looked up from her console with worry etched across her face. Doctor, the probability calculations still show a 30% chance of cascade failure in the displacement drives. If that happens during combat operations, then 30% of our ships blow up and the rest keep fighting, Corinne said bluntly. We're past the point of waiting for perfect solutions. The Council just killed 2 million people on New Horizon. How many more millions die while we run additional safety tests? Lisa nodded slowly. She understood. Everyone on the project understood. They had signed up to build weapons that might save humanity or might kill them all. There were no safe choices left. The Ghost Fleet began powering up its systems. Across human space, scattered warships received coded transmissions directing them to rendezvous coordinates in deep space. Captains abandoned diplomatic missions, broke off from Council exercises, and disappeared from sectors where they had operated for years. The Council's monitoring stations noticed the sudden movement of human vessels, but they dismissed it as panicked retreat. After all, what could Earth's primitive fleet do against the combined might of the Galactic Council? Captain Linda Foster commanded a small diplomatic vessel called the EDS Harmony, which had been stationed near the Valorian homeworld for 18 months. Her mission had been to foster cultural exchange and strengthen ties between humanity and the Empire. She had attended council ceremonies, participated in joint scientific ventures, and truly believed she was building bridges between species. When the activation codes for Operation Homecoming arrived, Linda had been in the middle of a formal dinner with Valorian officials. She excused herself politely, returned to her ship, and ordered immediate departure. The Valorian Port Authority demanded explanation. Linda gave them none. The Harmony's engines lit up and the ship broke orbit without waiting for clearance. Captain, the Valorians are threatening to open fire if we don't return to dock, her helmsman reported nervously. They can threaten all they want, Linda replied coldly. But if they fire on us, every ship in the system will know the Council's shooting at retreating vessels. Even their propaganda can't spin that favorably. Take us out of weapons range and prepare for jump to hyperspace. The Valorian authorities chose not to fire, but Linda knew it was only a matter of time before the Council realized that Earth's scattered forces were coordinating something. Whatever Operation Homecoming entailed, it needed to happen fast before the Council could reposition to counter it. Lieutenant Commander Paul Bennett had perhaps the strangest assignment of any human officer in Council space. He commanded a joint task force aboard a mixed-species vessel, working directly with Draxian and Terrian officers on anti-piracy operations. When the activation codes arrived, he had been sharing a meal with his Draxian counterpart, discussing tactics for their next patrol. Paul looked at the Draxian officer, someone he had worked alongside for 8 months, and wondered if the alien had known. Had they all known? Had every friendly conversation, every shared mission, every moment of apparent camaraderie been a lie? "I have to go," Paul said simply, standing from the table. The Draxian officer's expression shifted, and Paul saw something that might have been guilt flicker across the alien features. "You know," the Draxian said quietly, "your people know what we've done." "New Horizon had 2 million civilians," Paul replied, his voice dangerously calm. "Did you know about that too?" The Draxian looked away. "We were following orders. The Council said humanity was a threat." Paul wanted to rage, to demand answers, to make this alien understand the magnitude of what the Council had done. But there wasn't time. Human colonies were dying while he stood here talking to someone who had probably been reporting on his activities for months. "Tell your superiors something for me," Paul said as he headed for the airlock. "Tell them humanity remembers its enemies, and we're very, very good at payback." He made it back to his personal shuttle and launched before station security could lock down the docking bay. Behind him, he could hear the Draxian officer trying to explain to station command why a human officer had just fled. Paul didn't care. He had a rendezvous to make. Commander Steve Harrison led a squadron of fighters on what was supposed to be a cooperative patrol through a neutral sector. His pilots were good, some of the best Earth had produced, but they were flying older model ships that couldn't match the performance of Council military hardware. Or so the Council believed. When Steve received the activation codes, he immediately pulled his squadron into a defensive formation and broke off from the patrol route. The Council escort ships demanded explanation. Steve gave them coordinates to a non-existent emergency beacon and kept flying. "Boss, they're not buying it," his wingman called over the squadron channel. "3 Council interceptors breaking formation to follow us." Steve checked his tactical display. The interceptors were Valorian design, fast and heavily armed. In a straight fight, his squadron would be outgunned. But Steve hadn't survived 5 years in deep space by fighting fair. "Execute dispersal pattern Gamma," Steve ordered. "Let's see if these Council pilots are as good as they think they are." His squadron broke apart in a complex pattern that sent individual fighters in seemingly random directions. The Council interceptors hesitated, uncertain which target to pursue. In that moment of confusion, Steve's fighters activated experimental electronic countermeasures that Dr. Mitchell's team had quietly installed during their last maintenance cycle. The Council ship's sensors went haywire, showing phantom targets in every direction. By the time they realized they'd been spoofed, Steve's squadron was long gone, racing toward the rendezvous point at maximum speed. All across the galaxy, human ships were converging on coordinates that would bring them together for the first time since Earth joined the Council. Admiral Hayes watched the tactical display as icons representing human vessels appeared one by one, ships emerging from hyperspace at the designated location in deep space, far from any Council monitoring station. The rendezvous point was an empty sector between star systems, a deliberate choice to avoid detection. As more ships arrived, Hayes felt something he hadn't felt since the war began: hope. Not much, but enough to keep fighting. The EDS Valiant emerged from hyperspace, and Jake Morrison immediately requested a direct line to Hayes. When the connection established, Jake could see the full scope of what Earth had assembled. Hundreds of ships, representing every vessel that could break away from Council space. But it still wasn't enough to match the Council's numerical superiority. "Admiral, even with everyone here, we're outnumbered 20-1, Jake said. "What's the plan?" Hayes smiled grimly. "The plan, Commander, is to introduce the Council to some ships they've never seen before. Stand by for new arrivals." The space near the rendezvous point began to shimmer with exotic energy signatures. Jake had never seen anything like it. These weren't normal hyperspace exits. The fabric of space itself seemed to ripple and tear as vessels emerged from somewhere else entirely. The Ghost Fleet had arrived. Jake stared at the ships materializing around the Valiant. They were unlike anything in Earth's conventional navy. Sleek, angular designs that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Hull plating that shifted and changed as he watched, some kind of adaptive camouflage he had only read about in theoretical papers. These ships looked predatory, built for violence in a way that Earth's previous vessels never had been. "Dear God," Megan whispered beside him, "what are those?" "Those," Admiral Hayes said over the open channel, "are humanity's answer to the Council's betrayal. Project Retribution is now active. All ships prepare for combat operations." Dr. Karen Mitchell's voice came through on the command frequency. "Ghost Fleet reporting full operational status. All systems green. Displacement drives are functioning within acceptable parameters. We're ready, Admiral." Hayes stood on the bridge of his flagship, looking at the combined human armada. Conventional warships alongside experimental vessels that represented humanity's desperate gamble. Crews who had believed in peace now preparing for total war. It wasn't the future any of them had wanted, but it was the future the Council had forced upon them. "Set course for the Draxian home system," Hayes ordered. "Maximum speed. The Council wanted to see humanity's full potential. Let's show them what we're capable of when we stop holding back." Jake felt the Valiant's engine surge to full power as the entire fleet aligned for the jump to hyperspace. Around him, his crew worked with focused intensity, preparing weapon systems and running diagnostics on shields. These were the same people who had served on diplomatic missions just days ago. Now they were going to war. "Commander," Megan said quietly, pulling up a file on her console, "I've been analyzing the intercepted Draxian communications. There's something you should know about New Horizon." Jake braced himself. "What is it?" "The colony had 12 minutes of warning before the bombardment began. Some people made it to the emergency shelters. The survival rate was approximately 15%. That's 300,000 people who might still be alive down there. 300,000. Including, possibly, his daughter Amy. Jake felt something crack inside his chest, but he couldn't afford to fall apart now. If Amy had survived, if any of those colonists were still alive, they needed the fleet to succeed. They needed humanity to win. "Thank you, Lieutenant," Jake said, his voice steady despite the emotions churning inside him. "Make sure that information gets distributed to all ships. Our people need to know there are survivors worth fighting for." The fleet jumped to hyperspace as a single unit. Hundreds of human vessels moving together with a coordination that would have impressed even the Council's military analysts. But the Council wasn't watching these empty sectors of space. They were too busy consolidating their control over human colonies, too confident in their overwhelming superiority to imagine that Earth might strike back. In the command center beneath Earth's capital, President Helen Warren watched the fleet disappear from the tracking displays. Everything now depended on whether Dr. Mitchell's experimental weapons actually worked, whether Admiral Hayes could outthink an enemy with superior numbers, and whether humanity's capacity for warfare could match the legends that had made them apex predators on their own world. "God help us all," Helen whispered to the empty room. In hyperspace, the human fleet raced toward the Draxian home system. Crews checked and rechecked their equipment. Pilots ran simulations of combat scenarios they had never trained for. Engineers made final adjustments to weapon systems that had never been tested in actual battle. Everyone knew they were heading into a fight that would determine whether humanity survived as a free species or became a cautionary tale about trusting the wrong allies. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Valiant, looking at the photo of his daughter he kept on his personal console. Amy smiling under the alien sun of New Horizon, holding a sample of genetically modified wheat she had helped develop. She had been so proud of her work, so excited about contributing to humanity's future among the stars. "I'm coming, sweetheart," Jake whispered. "Just hold on a little longer." The fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Draxian system, and what they saw took their breath away. The Draxian home world floated before them, a beautiful planet of blue oceans and green continents. Orbital stations sparkled like jewels in the light of the system's sun. Hundreds of Draxian ships moved in peaceful patterns, conducting regular patrols and commercial operations. None of them were prepared for what was about to happen. Admiral Hayes opened a channel to the entire human fleet. His voice carried the weight of 3 years of betrayal, millions of deaths, and the burning need for justice. All ships, this is Hayes. The Draxian Consortium believed humanity would surrender or be crushed within days of their attack. They believed we were weak, primitive, easy prey. They were wrong. Today we show the galaxy what happens when you betray humanity's trust. Today we show them that Earth remembers its enemies. All ships, weapons free. Let's bring the devastation they brought to our people. For New Horizon. For Earth. For every human life the Council tried to extinguish. The human fleet surged forward, conventional warships alongside the Ghost Fleet's experimental vessels. Alarms began screaming across every Draxian installation as sensors picked up the impossible sight of 300 human warships appearing in their home system. The Council had wanted war. Earth was about to give them total devastation. The first shots fired by the human fleet weren't designed to destroy. They were designed to send a message that would echo across every star system in the galaxy. Captain Megan Phillips had been promoted to command of the EDS Retribution, one of the Ghost Fleet's experimental warships, and her orders were specific. Disable, don't destroy. Show overwhelming power, but demonstrate restraint that the Council never showed humanity. Her targeting officer locked onto the primary Draxian orbital defense platform, a massive structure that had protected their homeworld for 6 centuries. The Draxians considered it impregnable, a fortress that could withstand any conventional assault. They had never encountered humanity's electromagnetic pulse cannons. Fire, Megan ordered calmly. The Retribution's main weapon discharged with a sound like tearing fabric. A beam of concentrated electromagnetic energy crossed the distance to the defense platform in microseconds. Draxian shields flared brilliantly as they tried to absorb the attack, but the pulse weapon wasn't designed to overload shields. It was designed to bypass them entirely. Every electronic system on the defense platform died simultaneously. Lights went dark. Weapons offline. Life support switched to emergency backup. Artificial gravity failed, sending the station's crew floating helplessly through corridors. The platform that had guarded Draxus Prime for 600 years became a dead hulk in orbit, its thousands of personnel suddenly realizing they were completely helpless. Platform neutralized, Megan's tactical officer reported. No casualties detected. Their life support backup systems are functioning. Across the Draxian system, similar scenes played out as the Ghost Fleet deployed weapons that the Council's best scientists had never imagined. Gravitational collapse torpedoes that crushed shield generators without touching the ships themselves. Quantum displacement mines that teleported attacking vessels light years away from the battlefield. Adaptive countermeasures that turned the Draxians' own targeting systems against them. Admiral Hayes watched from his command ship as the Draxian home fleet scrambled to respond. They outnumbered the human forces 3-1 just in this system alone, but numbers meant nothing when your weapons couldn't hit targets that could appear and disappear across the battlefield faster than sensors could track. Commander Jake Morrison led a strike wing of conventional fighters against a Draxian battle group that was trying to form a defensive line around their capital shipyards. His pilots flew with precision that came from years of training, but also with rage that came from knowing what the Draxians had done to New Horizon. Gold Squadron, execute Pattern Delta, Jake ordered. Let's show them what human pilots can do. His fighters split into 3 groups, each approaching the Draxian ships from different vectors. The Draxians opened fire with plasma cannons that could vaporize a ship in a single hit. But Jake's pilots weren't where the Draxian targeting computers expected them to be. They flew in patterns that seemed random, but were actually carefully choreographed chaos designed to overwhelm enemy prediction algorithms. Lieutenant Danny Cooper screamed past a Draxian cruiser so close that his fighters' shields scraped against theirs. He launched a salvo of missiles that weren't armed with conventional explosives. Instead, they deployed electromagnetic nets that wrapped around the cruiser's engine pods and shut them down cold. The massive warship went dead in space, momentum carrying it harmlessly away from the battle. "Scratch one cruiser," Danny called over the squadron channel. "No casualties on our side or theirs." That was the pattern across the entire engagement. Human forces systematically dismantled the Draxian defense network without killing anyone they didn't have to. It was a demonstration of capability, combined with mercy, that the galaxy had never witnessed before. The Council had bombed civilian targets on New Horizon. Earth was disabling military vessels and sparing the crews. Dr. Karen Mitchell monitored the battle from her command center in the Ghost Fleet's flagship. Every weapon system she had designed was performing beyond theoretical projections. The displacement drives that had a 30% failure rate in simulations were working at 98% efficiency. The gravitational weapons that might have torn human ships apart were operating within safe parameters. "Doctor, we're receiving surrender requests from 15 Draxian vessels," her communications officer reported. "They're asking for quarter." Karen looked at the tactical display. The battle had been raging for less than 2 hours, and already the Draxian home fleet was falling apart. Not because they lacked courage or skill, but because they were fighting an enemy that had learned from 3 years of studying Council technology and then improved upon it in ways the Council never anticipated. "Accept their surrenders," Karen ordered. "Have recovery teams stand by to provide medical assistance and transfer their crews to secure holding areas. Make sure they're treated according to interstellar warfare conventions. We're not the Council. We don't murder helpless people." On the surface of Draxus Prime, panic spread through the capital city. Citizens who had been told that humanity was being crushed looked up to see their orbital defenses going dark one by one. News broadcasts that had been celebrating the Council's victory over the primitive humans suddenly went silent as government censors tried to control the narrative. But they couldn't control what every person with working eyes could see. Human ships dominated their sky. The impregnable defense platforms were drifting hulks. Their mighty fleet was surrendering or fleeing. In less than 3 hours, everything the Draxian military had built over 1,000 years of expansion had been rendered useless by a species they had dismissed as inferior. President Helen Warren watched the battle unfold from Earth's command center, and for the first time in days she allowed herself to hope. The Ghost Fleet was working. Admiral Hayes was executing his strategy perfectly. Humanity was proving that betraying them had been the worst mistake the Council ever made. "Madam President, we're receiving transmissions from other Council members," her Chief of Staff reported. "The Tarian Collective, the Nexian Commonwealth, and the Priloth Union are all requesting emergency diplomatic channels. They want to talk." "Tell them to watch what's happening at Draxus Prime," Helen replied coldly. "When they understand the consequences of attacking humanity, then we'll talk." Vice Admiral Greg Patterson stood beside her, reviewing casualty reports. Human losses were remarkably light. 16 fighters damaged, 3 ships with minor hull breaches, 0 fatalities. Meanwhile, the Draxian fleet was effectively destroyed as a fighting force, and they still had most of their personnel alive to tell the story of what happened when you crossed Earth. "This is going better than our best-case scenarios predicted," Patterson said quietly. "The Ghost Fleet's performance is extraordinary. Dr. Mitchell's team deserves every award we can give them." "They'll get their awards after we win," Helen said. "Right now, I need them to keep our people alive and show the galaxy that humanity fights wars differently than the Council does." The battle for Draxus Prime reached its conclusion when Admiral Hayes broadcast a message on every frequency the Draxians used. His voice was calm, measured, and absolutely implacable. "Draxian Consortium, this is Admiral Richard Hayes of the Earth Defense Forces. Your orbital defenses are destroyed. Your home fleet is neutralized. Your capital city is completely vulnerable to bombardment. We could reduce your homeworld to ash within the hour, but we won't. Because unlike you, we don't slaughter civilians. We came here to deliver a message. Earth remembers its enemies. We also remember that your people were manipulated by leaders who lied to you about humanity's intentions. Surrender now, and no more of your people need to die. Continue fighting, and we will systematically dismantle every military installation in Council space until you have no choice but to accept our terms." The response came within minutes. The Draxian premier appeared on the emergency diplomatic channel, and even through the video transmission, Hayes could see the alien leader's complete defeat in his posture. "We surrender," the premier said simply. "The consortium accepts Earth's terms. Please, no more destruction." Hayes nodded slowly. "Smart choice. Stand by for occupation forces and transition protocols. Any vessel that fires on human ships from this point forward will be destroyed without warning. Hayes out." The first phase of Earth's counteroffensive was complete, but the war was far from over. The Draxian Consortium had been the Council's primary instigator, but the Valorian Empire commanded the largest military force in known space. Until the Valorians accepted defeat, the Council could continue fighting. Captain Linda Foster had been assigned to intercept the Valorian response fleet at the Threshold Gateway, a strategic chokepoint that controlled access to 40 Council star systems. Intelligence reports suggested the Valorians were sending their legendary 7th Fleet, the most elite military formation in the Empire. 300 warships crewed by the best officers Valoria had produced in 500 years of expansion. Linda commanded a battle group of 60 ships, a mix of conventional Earth vessels and Ghost Fleet experimental craft. She was outnumbered 5-1 against opponents who had never lost a major engagement in their entire history. Most naval officers would have considered the situation hopeless. Linda Foster was not most officers. "All ships, this is Foster," she broadcast to her battle group. "The Valorians think they're invincible because they've never faced an opponent who could match their discipline and firepower. They're about to learn that discipline is no substitute for adaptability. We're going to use tactics that aren't in any military manual they've ever read. We're going to improvise, adapt, and overcome. And we're going to show them that human creativity beats rigid doctrine every single time." The Valorian 7th Fleet arrived at the Threshold Gateway in perfect formation, their ships aligned in geometric precision that reflected centuries of military tradition. Their commander, High Admiral Zorath, had studied the reports from Draxus Prime with growing concern. The humans had demonstrated unexpected capabilities, but the Valorians were not Draxians. The Empire's warriors were trained from birth for war. They would not surrender so easily. "Human vessels detected," Zorath's sensor officer reported. 60 ships in scattered formation around the gateway. They appear to be waiting for us." Zorath studied the tactical display with experienced eyes. The human formation looked almost random, ships positioned without any clear strategic purpose. Either they were incompetent or this was some kind of trap. Given what happened at Draxus Prime, he suspected the latter. "Advance in standard battle formation," Zorath ordered. "Maintain defensive screening. Watch for unconventional weapons." The Valorian fleet moved forward like a single organism, hundreds of ships maintaining perfect spacing and coordination. It was beautiful in its precision, a testament to thousands of years of military evolution. It was also predictable, which was exactly what Linda Foster had been counting on. "They're moving exactly like the simulations predicted," her tactical officer reported. "Formation, standard defensive posture. They're following their doctrine to the letter." "Then let's show them why doctrine can be a weakness," Linda replied. "Execute Operation Chaos." Her battle group exploded into motion, ships accelerating in what appeared to be completely random directions. Some dove toward the gateway's gravity well, others climbed above the plane of battle, several groups scattered to the flanks. To the Valorians, it looked like the human formation was falling apart in panic. Zorath smiled grimly. "They're breaking. All ships pursue and engage. Don't let them escape." The Valorian fleet adjusted course to chase the scattering human ships, and that's when Linda sprung her trap. The human vessels that had seemed to be fleeing in panic suddenly reversed course, using gravity assists from the gateway to slingshot back into the battle at tremendous velocity. Ships that had climbed above the battle plane came screaming down in attack dives that brought them through gaps in the Valorian formation. The rigid Valorian battle lines suddenly became a liability, as human ships appeared in positions where they shouldn't be possible, firing from angles the Valorian defensive doctrine hadn't accounted for. The Empire's warriors were trained to fight disciplined opponents who followed established tactical principles. They had never faced an enemy who deliberately broke every rule of conventional warfare. Lieutenant Commander Paul Bennett commanded one of the Ghost Fleet destroyers in Linda's battle group. His ship, the EDS Havoc, utilized the quantum displacement drive to appear directly behind a Valorian battlecruiser, too close for the larger ship's main weapons to target him. He launched a full spread of gravitational torpedoes that crushed the battlecruiser's shield generators like empty cans. "Displacement drive recharged and ready," his engineering officer called. "Where to next, sir?" "Pick another target and let's dance," Paul replied with savage satisfaction. "These Valorians wanted to fight the best humanity has to offer. Let's make sure they remember this day." The battle raged for 6 hours, and every minute showed the difference between rigid doctrine and adaptive creativity. The Valorians fought with tremendous courage and skill, but they were trained to fight a certain kind of battle. Linda Foster gave them a completely different kind of battle, one where the rules changed every few minutes and victory went to whoever could think fastest. Commander Steve Harrison led his fighter squadron in attacks that would have been considered suicidal against any opponent, except one locked into predictable response patterns. He would dive straight at Valorian capital ships, forcing them to choose between maintaining formation or breaking to engage his fighters. When they maintained formation per doctrine, he exploited the gaps. When they broke formation to engage, he disappeared before they could target him effectively. "This is too easy," Steve's wingman called over the squadron channel. "They keep making the same mistakes." "That's because they're following orders," Steve replied. "Their commanders are trained to maintain formation and execute predetermined battle plans. We're trained to improvise and exploit opportunities. Keep hitting them. Eventually their doctrine will break." And break it did. After 6 hours of fighting an enemy who refused to engage in a proper battle, High Admiral Zorath made the hardest decision of his career. The 7th Fleet, undefeated in 500 years, began withdrawing from the Threshold Gateway. Linda Foster could have pursued and inflicted more damage, but she held her forces back. She had accomplished her objective. The gateway was secure, and the galaxy had just watched humanity defeat the Valorians' best fleet with a force 1/5 their size. "All ships, maintain position," Linda ordered. "Let them go. We've made our point." The news of the Valorian defeat spread across the galaxy faster than light-speed communication could carry it. The Council's most powerful military force had been beaten by human tactics and technology. Smaller Council members began withdrawing from the war, realizing that they had been manipulated into a conflict that benefited only the Draxian and Valorian leadership. The Terrian Collective was the first to break ranks. Their ambassador appeared on interstellar broadcasts, denouncing the attack on humanity and revealing classified documents showing how Draxian agents had fabricated evidence of human treaty violations. The Nexian Commonwealth followed, then the Priloth Union, then a dozen smaller members. The Council was fracturing, and Earth had barely begun its offensive. Admiral Hayes coordinated the next phase from his flagship, directing human forces to liberate the colonies still under Council occupation. The operation required precision timing and overwhelming force applied at critical points. Most importantly, it required showing occupied human populations that Earth hadn't abandoned them. Commander Jake Morrison led the Liberation Fleet to New Horizon. His hands shook as his ship dropped out of hyperspace, and the devastated colony world appeared on his view screen. The northern continent where Amy had been studying showed massive blast craters from the Draxian bombardment. Cities that had housed millions were smoking ruins. "Life signs?" Jake asked quietly. His sensor officer worked for several long minutes before responding. "Sir, I'm detecting survivors in the emergency shelters. Approximately 280,000 people. The shelters are running on backup power, but they're intact." Jake closed his eyes and allowed himself one moment of hope before switching back to commander mode. "All ships, deploy recovery teams. Get those people out of there and onto medical transports. I want every survivor off-planet within 12 hours. The liberation of New Horizon proceeded smoothly because the Draxian occupation force surrendered without firing a shot. They had watched what happened at their homeworld and knew that resistance was futile. More than that, they knew Earth was offering them something the Draxian leadership never had: mercy. When the first human survivor emerged from the emergency shelter, Jake Morrison was there personally to greet them. It wasn't Amy. It was a young boy, maybe 8 years old, covered in dust and frightened but alive. The boy looked up at Jake and asked the question on every survivor's mind: "Are we safe now?" Jake knelt down to the boy's level and nodded. "Yes, you're safe. Earth is here and we're taking everyone home." Over the next week, human forces liberated colony after colony. The pattern was always the same: overwhelming force, minimal casualties, council occupiers surrendering rather than fighting, and human survivors evacuated to safety. Earth was demonstrating both its capacity for devastating warfare and its commitment to preserving life whenever possible. The contrast with the Council's conduct became the dominant story across every news network in the galaxy. The Council had bombed civilian targets. Earth was liberating colonies and treating enemy prisoners humanely. The Council had lied about humanity's intentions. Earth was broadcasting every battle unedited for the galaxy to judge. President Helen Warren understood that this war wouldn't be won purely through military victory. It would be won by showing the galaxy that humanity represented something better than the Council's corrupt leadership. Every liberated colony, every surrendering enemy treated with dignity, every civilian life saved reinforced that message. Vice Admiral Patterson coordinated the psychological warfare campaign from Earth, making sure that every Council citizen could see the truth about what their governments had done. He broadcast footage of New Horizons' ruins alongside footage of human forces providing medical care to Draxian prisoners. He showed Council propaganda claiming humans were savages next to clips of Admiral Hayes accepting surrenders and sparing defeated enemies. Public opinion across Council space is shifting dramatically, Patterson reported to President Warren. We're seeing protests on 17 worlds demanding that their governments negotiate peace with Earth. The Council's narrative is collapsing. Good, Helen replied. But we can't stop until the Council's military is completely broken. Public opinion matters, but only if we back it up with force sufficient to guarantee our security. The final confrontation came at the Council headquarters station itself, a massive diplomatic and military complex that orbited the neutral world where the Council had been founded 3,000 years ago. Admiral Hayes brought the entire human fleet to Council headquarters, hundreds of ships surrounding the station that represented galactic governance. The Council's remaining military forces assembled to defend their seat of power, but they knew it was hopeless. Earth had defeated the Draxians at their homeworld, beaten the Valorians at the Threshold Gateway, and liberated every human colony. The only question now was whether the Council would surrender or force humanity to destroy their last military assets. Commander Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Valiant as President Helen Warren's holographic image appeared on every viewscreen in the system. She was broadcasting to the entire galaxy, and her message would determine whether the war ended today or continued until the Council was completely destroyed. Members of the Galactic Council, 3 weeks ago your forces attacked human colonies without warning or provocation. You murdered millions of civilians based on fabricated evidence and lies. You believed humanity would be easily defeated because we were new to galactic civilization, because our technology seemed primitive, because you underestimated what humans are capable of when you threaten our survival. Helen paused, letting her words sink in across thousands of worlds. You were wrong. Earth's military has systematically defeated every force you sent against us. We have liberated our colonies, captured your fleets, and demonstrated technological superiority that your best scientists claimed was impossible. We could destroy this station and every ship defending it within the hour, but we won't, because humanity seeks justice, not genocide. We want accountability, not annihilation. The Council chamber fell silent as Helen outlined Earth's terms. full reparations for destroyed colonies, criminal prosecution of council leaders who orchestrated the attack, complete restructuring of council governance with human oversight, permanent seats for Earth on all decision-making bodies, technology sharing treaties that worked both ways, and most importantly, ironclad guarantees that no species would ever again be betrayed as humanity had been. These terms are non-negotiable, Helen concluded. Accept them, and we rebuild the Council as something better than it was. Reject them, and Earth will systematically dismantle every military installation in Council space until you have no choice but to accept. You have 12 hours to decide. The transmission ended, and the galaxy held its breath. In the Council chambers, the Draxian Premier looked at his fellow leaders with defeat written across his features. The Valorian High Command sat in stunned silence, still processing the destruction of their 7th Fleet. The smaller council members who had already withdrawn from the war waited to see what the major powers would do. Finally, the Valorian Emperor himself appeared on the council floor. He was ancient by his species' standards, a warrior who had led the Empire through 50 years of expansion. He looked at the assembly and spoke words that would be remembered for generations. We picked a fight with the wrong species. I vote to accept Earth's terms. The Draxian Premier nodded slowly. The consortium agrees. We surrender unconditionally. One by one, every council member voted to accept humanity's terms. The war was over. Earth had won not just a military victory, but something more profound. They had won the moral high ground, demonstrated superiority in warfare, and then shown mercy to defeated enemies. Admiral Hayes received the surrender notification and broadcast it to the entire human fleet. All ships stand down from combat status. The Council has accepted our terms. The war is over. We're going home. On the bridge of the Valiant, Jake Morrison felt tears streaming down his face. They had won. Against impossible odds, scattered across the galaxy, betrayed by those they trusted, humanity had fought back and achieved total victory. And most importantly, they had done it without becoming the monsters the Council claimed they were. "Sir, we're receiving a personal transmission for you," Megan Phillips said gently. "It's from the medical transport that evacuated New Horizons survivors." Jake's hands shook as he accepted the transmission. A young woman appeared on his screen, covered in medical dressings but alive and smiling. Amy, his daughter, had survived. "Hey, Dad," Amy said softly. "I heard you came to get us." "Thanks for not giving up." Jake couldn't speak for a moment, emotion overwhelming his ability to form words. Finally he managed, "Never. I would never give up on you." Across human space, similar reunions played out as survivors reconnected with families, as soldiers returned home, as humanity began the long process of rebuilding what the Council had tried to destroy. But they were rebuilding from a position of strength now. Earth wasn't a junior member of the Council anymore. They were the dominant power, the species that had been tested in fire and emerged stronger. Dr. Karen Mitchell stood in the observation bay of her research facility, watching as the Ghost Fleet returned to the hidden shipyards. Her experimental weapons had performed beyond all expectations, but she took no joy in the destruction they had caused. She was a scientist, not a warrior. She had built these terrible weapons because humanity's survival demanded it, and now she would work to ensure they were never needed again. Captain Linda Foster accepted command of Earth's new Council liaison fleet, tasked with ensuring the peace treaties were honored. She had proven herself one of humanity's finest tactical minds at the Threshold Gateway, and now that creativity would be applied to building lasting peace instead of winning battles. Commander Steve Harrison received a promotion and assignment to train the next generation of human pilots. The tactics he had developed fighting the Valorians would become standard doctrine for Earth's military, ensuring that future officers understood the value of adaptability over rigid planning. President Helen Warren addressed Earth's population from the steps of the Capitol building, speaking to billions who had lived through the darkest days of human history and emerged victorious. "We were betrayed by those we trusted. We were attacked without provocation. Millions of our people died because the Galactic Council saw us as weak and expendable, but we proved them wrong. Not just through military might, though we demonstrated that in abundance. We proved them wrong by showing the galaxy that strength combined with mercy, that power tempered by justice, represents the future they should aspire to build. She paused, looking out at the crowd. Earth will take its place among the stars not as conquerors, but as leaders. We will rebuild the Council into something worthy of the ideals it claims to represent. We will ensure that no species is ever betrayed as we were, and we will never forget the price we paid for trusting those who saw our goodwill as weakness. The rebuilding process took years. Human engineers worked alongside former enemies to restore damaged colonies. War crimes tribunals prosecuted Council leaders responsible for the attack, showing the galaxy that even in victory, Earth believed in rule of law. Technology sharing agreements revolutionized multiple species' capabilities, as humanity proved that cooperation based on mutual respect achieved more than exploitation. The Galactic Council still existed, but it operated under new principles that Admiral Hayes personally helped draft: peace through strength, unity through respect, justice for all sentient beings. Every species had equal representation, backed by enforcement mechanisms that prevented any single power from abusing the system. Commander Jake Morrison retired from military service and moved back to New Horizon with his daughter Amy. They helped rebuild the agricultural settlements that had been destroyed, planting new crops in soil that had been scorched by Draxian bombardment. It was hard work, painful work, but it was also healing work. One evening, standing in fields of growing wheat under alien stars, Amy asked her father the question that haunted many survivors. Was it worth it? All the death, all the destruction, all the cost. Jake looked at the settlement growing around them, at the mix of humans and aliens working together to build something new. He thought about the war, about the terrible price humanity paid, about the devastation they brought to their enemies. He thought about the future his daughter would have in a galaxy where Earth's strength ensured its security. "I don't know if worth it is the right phrase," Jake said slowly. "The Council's betrayal cost us millions of lives and forced us to become something we never wanted to be. But we survived. We proved that humanity deserves its place among the stars. And maybe, just maybe, we made the galaxy a little bit better in the process." Amy nodded, understanding that some questions didn't have simple answers. Across the rebuilt colonies, across Earth itself, across human vessels now serving as the Council's primary peacekeeping force, similar conversations took place. Humanity had been tested in ways no one anticipated. They had discovered capabilities they never knew they possessed. They had won a war that should have ended in their extinction. But more than that, they had demonstrated to the galaxy that humans were different. Not because they could build better weapons or win impossible battles, but because even in total victory, even with the power to reduce their enemies to ash, they chose mercy. They chose justice. They chose to build rather than destroy. The Galactic Council had betrayed Earth expecting easy conquest. Earth's fleet arrived and brought total devastation to their military might. But in the end, what devastated the Council most completely wasn't humanity's weapons. It was humanity's unwillingness to become the monsters that their enemies expected. The galaxy would never underestimate Earth again. But more importantly, they would never forget that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their capacity for war. It was their commitment to building a better future, even from the ashes of betrayal and conflict. The stars that had looked so cold to Jake Morrison on the day the war began now seemed warm again. Humanity had earned its place among them, not through conquest, but through courage, innovation, and the wisdom to know when to fight and when to show mercy. The Council learned their lesson about betraying humanity. Earth remembered its enemies, but Earth also remembered that the ultimate victory wasn't defeating your enemies. It was turning them into allies and building something better together than either could achieve alone. That was humanity's true devastation. Not the destruction of fleets, but the destruction of the old order that allowed betrayal and exploitation. In its place, humanity helped build something new, something better, something worthy of the stars themselves.